You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by Nax. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Before there was Wawa, Love's, or Buc-ee's, there was Stuckey's. Now, I didn't make that up. I read it in a book called Unstuck, which was written by Stephanie Stuckey. We're going to talk about a lot of things in that book and the journey that she's taken from purchasing the Stuckey's rights to where we are today. So, Stephanie, thanks for joining us today. We've had you on a couple times talking about various things, but let's just start off with a book. You came out with a book in April. Why did you decide a book was a good idea, and what did you want to communicate in that book?
I wrote the book, and first of all, Jeff, thank you for having me on. I am always honored when people ask me to share what's happening with Stuckey's and also learn more about what you're doing. And you and I are fellow road trippers. So anytime you want me to either be on your show or take a road trip, the answer is yes. So what inspired me to write the book? I actually wrote the book as almost a catharsis to help me deal with the process of really changing my life around. I did not plan on being in the convenience store industry. It was something that was unexpected later in life, and to try to figure out where Stuckey's had been so I could understand how to move the company forward, I started researching my grandfather's story and writing it down to help me remember and put it all together for myself in a cohesive timeline. And in the process, I discovered what amazing stories he had that are evergreen. They're still relevant today. A lot of the lessons on how you build a brand and how you grow a convenience store chain are still relevant today. And so I just thought it was a story worth sharing, but I didn't deliberately pitch it. I actually had my publisher reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Have you thought about writing a book?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I've already got it written." And so that sort of began the whole process. I ended up getting an agent and pitching to other publishers, and then arriving at the publisher who initially asked me if I was interested in writing a book. So I love how things come full circle.
So in the book, there's a focus on road trips. And yeah, you talk about we love road trips. And first off, everybody needs to go on a road trip with Stephanie, because I've done a couple of them recently. One of them was the day before the NAC show. Another one was just this summer. We were both in Florida for a Florida Petroleum Marketers Association meeting, and Stephanie said, "You have a couple free hours." So first stop on our list was, we were just driving down the street, main drag, and there was a really cool looking hotel. And Stephanie said, "Well, let's go check it out." We walk inside. It says birthplace of NASCAR. Okay, that's interesting. Talk to the owner, and he's like, "Hey, we'll take you to the rooftop. That's where they have the bar. That's where they founded NASCAR. Oh, by the way, there's Al Capone's vault." And here I am, like 10 minutes in the car with you, tops. And it's just like, this was a pretty cool day. And I think that just exemplifies what road trips are. And I remember in Atlanta, you told me that road trips aren't necessarily about distance. It's more about what you do.
That's right. And the unexpected. So we had a list of places that we wanted to hit. And along the way, we drove by the Streamline Hotel and discovered this cool Art Deco building. And it's a sense of adventure. It's a willingness to pull over where you weren't planning on going. That's the great thing about a road trip, is that sense of freedom and fun and independence and discovery. And we decided, let's just check out this hotel. And it was super fun. And then we went to some of the other places, like the drive-in church. How fun was that?
Yes,
it's
it was.
A drive-in theater, right?
Yep.
Absolutely part of the road trip car culture. So we were hitting places that aligned with the NAX brand, so to speak. And it was just so cool. It was a former drive-in theater that had been converted to a drive-in church.
And one more part
I
of
just think that was so much fun.
Then it's like, okay, let's go get lunch. This place looked good. It had food made from scratch, and it was delicious. And then we asked how long have they been there, and they said, well, before that we were in a gas station. And it's just like, okay,
Bam.
Wow, this wasn't rigged. This was just what it's like on the road. Okay, that's a little bit about us. But I want you to talk about the road trip. We talked about it on previous times, but when you've been on the show, but you basically said that when you took over the company, there were a number of stores still under the purview of Stuckey's. You as a company modified where you are from more owning stores to providing product to stores. That transition, you still have stores along the way, but you really found the road trip, I think, in both reading what your grandfather wrote, and your grandfather was the one who founded the company, but also you had to visit all the stores. So along the way, you must have made the decision, like, let's just have some fun on the road and take it from something you didn't want to do to something you absolutely wanted to do. Was that all accidental, luck? How did it happen?
It happened organically, not entirely accidental. I will say all of our life's experiences help inform our career moves. So folks who are listening may have spent their entire lives deliberately wanting to pursue a career in the convenience industry, and some of them have had different careers and found themselves really loving this community of C-stores across America. And no matter what you've done, you'll find the skills that you've learned along the way are helpful. And my background is actually politics. This is political season when we're taping this, so I'm not going to get into blue versus red because I want everyone to enjoy pecan log rolls, but it's more the process of getting elected that I think is relevant here. And when I got a new district after redistricting, the first thing I did was do a listening tour. And I walked the district. I knocked on doors. I listened to people. I canvassed neighborhoods. And I learned what was interesting to them, what issues mattered to them. So the same concept applies to running a convenience store chain, because you've got stores all over the place, right? We were in 20 states. And so I was going and talking not only to the store operators, but the employees, the cashiers, the customers, trying to get a sense of store operations in the community and what made them tick. And then I guess it's fortunate that there aren't that many Stuckeys left, because they were so far apart that I might drive for a day and a half before I hit another one. And that gets pretty boring if you're just driving on the interstate the whole time. Some folks may just absolutely love driving on I-20 or I-95 for hours and hours with this monotonous road. But not me. I got bored. I wanted to pull over. I started clicking the function on the map app where you can say avoid highways, right? And I started taking some of those older state routes and really exploring what small town America, what communities had to offer. And that's where you discover the fun stuff, right? So yeah, I didn't deliberately plan it. I was bored and I thought, well, I need to explore. And then in that process, I saw all these great convenience stores out there that offer something unique and special and different. And that was such an inspiration to me.
And another thing you talk about, it's about authenticity and what you figured out tied in to what your grandfather figured out, which is, life on the road needs to be fun. And one of the lines I've mentioned this in the past, not to you, but fake it till you make it is not one of my favorite phrases, because that goes in conflict with everything people say, which is to be organic, to be authentic. And you said, be real till you make it. Do you want to explain what that means?
It doesn't mean that you don't put yourself out there and you try to stretch your abilities and you have confidence in yourself, because that is important. But it's got to come from a place of genuineness, or else it's not going to work. And especially now, I'm discovering with younger generations, and I think a lot of us in the convenience store business are working really hard to make sure that we're adapting to a changing customer base. And the younger generation, they're like, no BS. I know they often live on social media, but you see a lot of what's really getting traction isn't always the most beautiful people. It's the people, or by conventional standards, I should say. I absolutely love seeing some of the influencers out there that aren't your typical prototype. This is what is considered attractive, but you're seeing more and more that the newer generation is embracing diversity, and they're embracing different cultures and different ways of viewing the world. And that's all coming from a willingness to be honest about who you are. And that, I think, works with trying to communicate to others, but it also works with trying to communicate internally. You've got to be comfortable with yourself. And the French have a saying, comfortable in your own skin. You've got to be comfortable in your own skin, and you embrace that and you lead with that and push yourself at the same time, but don't fake it. I don't think any of us need to fake it. We all belong in the room. We've all worked hard to be where we are. And so own that and represent, and know that you're working for good brands, and you're part of a team, and get out there and hustle.
So,
but don't fake it.
Good. Thank you. So I want to spend some time talking about lessons for small businesses, because the book has so many interesting concepts in there. Just one final thing about road trips. As the road trip, the popularity, your ability to tell stories through road trips. And one of the things you mentioned, you're a defense attorney formerly, and success was having a good story. So you linked on to the road trip as the way to move Stuckey's forward. But there were also some issues that not everybody within the organization was on board with the idea of road trips. So talk about that process and getting everybody to understand why your story about road trips was the one that could take Stuckey's forward.
So I think you're talking about specifically the road trip where I pulled over and there was the store that just was a hot mess.
Well, it was more, I'll listen to that, but it was also the Team Stuckey's first team road trip.
Yes.
That's what I want to talk about.
So I call that the 12 Angry Men moment. If you've seen that movie or watched the play, there's a famous play that became a movie about getting in the back of a jury, getting in a jury room. And initially it was 11-1. Everyone wanted to convict the defendant. My background is also law. I was a public defender, so I tried a lot of cases. And there was one very convincing and compelling juror who managed to sway everyone over to his side. Ultimately, I hope I'm not totally giving the plot away. I just did, though. Sorry. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, but it's a 50-year-old movie, right?
Yes,
okay, so
right.
if you,
most folks should be familiar with the plot. But the bigger picture is that you need to really have consensus on what does your brand represent. And often you can go in a lot of different directions, but it's important to lead with something integral to what you really represent and what you're passionate about and what you can be super good at. All of that matters. Oh, and by the way, you should be able to make a profit at what you're passionate about too. So you get the intersection of that. And our team had a fierce debate about whether we were going to lead with a pecan or lead with a road trip. And both had merit, but we really felt strongly that the road trip was what you could tell a story about. And that's what people can really relate to. Not everyone can relate to a pecan, but I think most people can relate to the concept of a road trip and what the road trip represents, that fun and that spirit of discovery. And so we arrived at that, but you had to have consensus. We had to have consensus for it to really have sticking power. You had to have the whole team agree that this is the direction we need to be going in. And it's working.
And that was basically the elephant in the room that needed to be addressed to move forward.
What do we stand for?
Yeah.
Every brand needs to think about that. And then it's evolving.
So
your brand may change.
I mentioned small businesses, and Stuckey's at its peak had about 380 stores. But when you took over, you had a joke in there that you thought Ibida was a Swedish rock band. You probably knew a little bit more about finances, but it was a funny line, even though you know music, and I would imagine that you didn't know that, you didn't think that. But you said that really a novice looking at a business, obviously you were successful in various pursuits, but not in running a business. And what are things that, having gone through this now 5 years through this, that you would advise somebody, whether they're new to the industry, any industry, or just starting in the industry. I know one thing you mentioned, Harvard Business Schools has a wonderful guide on mergers and acquisitions, but
yes,
what would you advise somebody to do when they're just starting out, looking back at your journey the last 5 years?
First of all, I would know what you're good at and have confidence that you have a strength that has value to the team, and really have some time for self-reflection to decide what is it that you bring that's of the most value to the team. And the flip side to that is, what is it that you aren't as strong in? And so how can there are two things you need to do. One is equip yourself so you're more knowledgeable, but at the same time, surround yourself with experts, because we can't all be experts in every aspect of running a business, whether it's a convenience store or food manufacturing. You can't know everything. I'm not an expert in food safety. That's not my jam. But boy, is that one of the most critical things that any of us do if you're in food service. You better get that right. So we hired someone who that is all she does day in and day out, is she's obsessed with food safety. And at the same time, I've educated myself. So you buy books, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I learned so much about the convenience store industry. This isn't a shameless plug. This is authenticity. I listen to this podcast and learn every day about different aspects of the industry. And I watch YouTube tutorials. So I actually did not know what EBITDA was. I had to Google it. And I've since watched several webinars on understanding basic finance. And I've elevated a little bit more with sit-down meetings with our team to understand. But the point is, know what you're good at, trust that, and then build a team around where you've got some gaps, but also fill in your own knowledge base.
So when you're an entrepreneur, there's comfort in working for someone. Working for yourself is scary, but also I would imagine that people who do that feel like, I can solve this. There's certainly a reason you said, I can be the boss. How does one maybe take that step back and say, okay, I may be the CEO, but I'm not the expert on this. What is there a process you go through that you would suggest for someone? Or is it just like, hey, I clearly don't know this and I'm not good at it, so let's make this decision the first month?
Most importantly, it's understanding your appetite for risk. And if you are a risk-averse person, entrepreneurship is not for you, period. I think people love to say, I'm an entrepreneur, and there is a certain sexiness and panache to that, but it's really, really hard. You will have those 3 a.m. moments all the time about whether or not you're meeting payroll, or you can service your debt, or you can manage growth appropriately, meet demand. I mean, the list goes on and on. So there's a lot that you have to bear if you are an entrepreneur. And quite often, as you're scaling, you have to learn how to do things yourself, because you can't afford to have this massive team. So it's understanding your appetite for risk. And it's okay if that's not your jam. It's not for everyone. There's a lot of security in working for an industry, for a company that provides everything you need, health insurance and a good salary and a great team and the resources, and you don't have to scrimp and worry about payroll. That's not your job. And so there's that security. You just have to decide what's best for you. And I will add that I started out as CEO because we didn't have a CEO and we needed one. And I found that what I really loved doing was being essentially the brand ambassador for the brand and representing Stuckey's by giving speeches and going to trade shows, writing this book, doing pitches for new accounts. And that is what I think I'm best suited for. And I have a business partner who runs the company day to day. He started out as president, I was CEO, and 2.5, 3 years into it, I sat down with him and said, I would really like for you to be CEO. He runs a company day in, day out, and I'm chair of the board, and it's worked out great. It's been a year since we made that transition. I don't know about him, but I'm happy with it.
We'll have him on. We'll have him on.
He's happy.
One of these. Yeah.
He's really good at it. His name's R.G. Lamar, and he's in the book. I write a lot about R.G. People sometimes struggle with his name, and I say just think really great, because he's just really great. He's a good person, and he's a good leader. And I've seen him grow in the role since he got the title. And not that you need a title to expand, but I think sometimes having that title is an outward recognition of your inward work. And I really saw where once he officially had the title that was true to what he was doing with the company, it really helped him expand even further into being a great leader and an empathetic leader.
It also opens a whole lot of doors when you have a conversation that's, the CEO called as opposed to somebody else.
That's right. That's important. That's important externally. I've got the name, so that opens doors. My last name's Stuckey. I'm going to be able to open doors whether I have the title or not. And I think him having the CEO title is important for so many reasons, but you're absolutely right. That helps open doors, and it lets people know he really knows what he's doing, and you need to take that call. If R.G. Lamar calls, you all answer it.
So I'll just nerd out on one more business question, and we'll end with a little bit more fun and light stuff. It won't be so heavy, I guess, if you will. But one other thing I'd like you to talk about is you talked about the idea in businesses there are shocks and there are stresses. And they're very different, but some people treat them the same. You want to talk about that?
Well, it gets to resilience. And my role with the city of Atlanta was Chief Resilience Officer. And it was a program that was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. They invested $100 million in the resilience program and training people at the city level about what resilience was. So I had the benefit of a world-class leader in the space of resilience training me on what that meant. And that's transferable to government, and from government to business to nonprofit. It doesn't matter what your field is. The resilience lessons I learned and the training I got from the Rockefeller Foundation has been invaluable. And they talk about the shocks. And so shocks are things that you can't always anticipate. You might have a tornado. You could have it doesn't have to be an environmental event. It could be civil unrest. It could be an election, right? We've got an election coming up. The election doesn't go your way, and suddenly the economic landscape is very different as a result of regulatory shifts in your business. So there's all these shocks that you can't always predict, and you can't 100% know what the shock is going to be. But there will be disruptions. If you're in business long enough, you're going to have shocks. And then there's the other side, which is the more important side, which are the stresses. And that's the underlying issues that really tear at the fabric of your organization. And that's the stuff that takes a lot of hard work to address. Equality of pay, worker happiness. In the city context, we were struggling with income inequality, affordable housing. Affordable housing was absolutely the number one. So if you don't get certain things right, the shocks, you're going to have a harder time managing them and recovering from them. And the last point I'll make about resilience is I think too often people mistake resilience for sustainability. And sustainability is you have some crisis and you consider it a high five win if you get back to the point where you were before the crisis hit. Oh, we're right back where we were. That's sustaining. That's sustainability. Resilience is this crisis happened. It's that whole concept of learning from failure. What went wrong? How can we learn from it? And how do we rebuild in a way that is stronger and better than we were before? So as a result of that crisis that was unanticipated, you're actually stronger. And so that gets to the very essence of addressing the stresses and becoming a resilient business, government, organization.
So I said want to end on a little bit more of a lighter note and talk about
happy
a couple.
Note.
Yeah, we'll happy. So one of the things I loved in hearing about when you took over and you're trying to figure out what to make of everything. And you had a whole bunch of, shall we say, distressed assets in terms of things that are on your shelves. And you created something called mystery boxes, which I think is genius, and you made something out of nothing, and something that actually had a margin out of something that would have cost you money to dump. I thought that was a super interesting idea.
Thank you. It's the whole concept of life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. In my case, it was life gives you ashtrays shaped like toilets that say put your butts here, John Wayne bobbleheads, and Britney Spears t-shirts that say it's Britney bitch. And what do you do with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't worth a whole lot. We had dusty inventory literally piling up dirt and grime on our shelves. I had to clean a lot of the stuff that I put in the mystery boxes before we bundled them all up. But we bundled them and we put them in these fun boxes and we told a story, and every single one was different. It was quite a challenge figuring out what was the price point on these things because every single one was different. But we were able to turn a profit. We knew collectively what all the inventory was valued. And we ended up making about $40K off of inventory that we were literally looking at writing off as a loss. So, just the bigger picture is, well, have fun, embrace where you are and figure out how to make do with what you've got. Because too often in business, we think, the solution is to spend money. Solution is to bring in a consultant or an expert, which I'm not knocking that. Sometimes that's super helpful and we use consultants, but it's not always to spend money or to consider things a loss. It's like, what can we do with the assets that we have, with the talent we have, with the inventory, with what's in stock? What can we do to turn a profit? And you'll find that's where you get really creative, and you never know. It might be a big hit.
Well, and you also said you got the idea from the mystery box idea from when you were a kid and on road trips, and there were
from my
mystery
grandfather.
bags. Yeah. So, what's old is new again.
That's right. Learn from the past. Like, don't live in the past, but you can absolutely learn from it and then create your own fun twist to it. My grandfather had different things in his little bags, and so I reinvented that in a fun way. But yeah, absolutely. Learn from the past.
So there's so many other things in the book that is interesting. We're not going to talk about them here. We're not going to talk about a song on the Rolling Stones album, Sticky Fingers, that was written by a guy who worked at Stuckey's. We're not going to talk about the idea of what the word pecan means in Algonquin. And we're not going to talk about husband and wife stores, which is a super fascinating concept that involves Stuckey's in the 50s. You're going to have to buy the book for that. And whether you decide that this is worth talking about or not, I didn't expect reading the book to read this one name in it. Sid Vicious. Do you want to talk about that? Because it's like, Stuckey's, Sid Vicious. That makes total sense.
The Rolling Stones, Sid Vicious, you never know who you're going to come into contact with through Stuckey's. So Sid Vicious stopped at Stuckey's. There's a photo that showed up in my Instagram feed one day, and he is standing at the counter, and there's a chili dog sign over his head. And any of you who are punk rock fans, you might remember there's a very famous photo of Sid Vicious eating a chili dog. So part of me wants to think that he bought that chili dog at Stuckey's. And then just the other week, the Shaquille O'Neal pulled over at a Stuckey's in Orange, Texas. Someone posted on Instagram. So that's always fun. The unexpected moments that you get to just really embrace and bring some joy to the work that we're doing. When you see people out there who have some fan base and notoriety that enjoy your brand.
Yeah, and there's other stories in there, but you have to buy the book or somehow get
Truman
a hold of the
Capote.
book. So
Truman Capote is in there.
That's another good one.
He stopped at Stuckey's.
Final question for you. What would you tell Stephanie Stuckey in 2019 that you wish she knew then, but she knows now? And I know I'm talking third person there. So, but I guess easier way of saying that, what would you have told yourself 5 years ago, knowing what you know now?
I have been asked that question before, and I'm going to answer it differently than I have in the past. And that is, I don't think I'd want to tell myself anything because I may not have made the mistakes I made that I've really learned from. There's a beauty in having to figure things out without someone from the future tapping you on the shoulder and whispering in your ear and saying, oh, by the way, COVID's going to happen. Make sure you're ready for it. I don't know how I'd prepare myself better for COVID, but just sometimes it's good to live in the moment and be present and face what's happening right now and not knowing. I'm glad I didn't know, because had I not been, frankly, a little naive, had I really known how hard this was going to be, I'd like to think I'd still do it again, but I might not have. So I think I just let myself do what I did. Ask the dumb questions, what's EBITDA, and make some mistakes and learn from them. And I'm still making mistakes and I'm still learning from it. There are things I would have done differently from last week. But hopefully I'm not making the same mistakes. That's where I get upset with myself. As long as it's new mistakes and we're learning from what we've done, that's what matters.
So life is a journey, and take the road trips on the journey, because the journey is half the fun. Did I summarize that okay? Do I get
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's not about making good time. It's about making time good when you're taking a road trip.
Oh, I like that one even better.
That's for the dads out there, No, I hate to stereotype, but my father was always the one who's like, we've got to leave at 5 a.m. and be there by 5 p.m., where my mom would want us to meander and pull over.
Well, pick up the book. It's called Unstuck, and find Stephanie on the road, whether it's at the largest ball of twine, whether it's at a C-store, whether it's at the NAC show or other industry events. She's a great storyteller, and she's a great asset for our industry. And thank you for being on today's podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been my pleasure.
And we will see you down the road.
Always.
Thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.